At first, I want to start out with farming. Farming and food. And the first thing that we want to talk about here is the COB, corn oil based diet. And so I call it the COB diet, and that's what I'll call it from now on. But it obviously refers to the corn part. And it's a part, it's really the basis for the SAD, Standard American Diet, which I think one of my terms that most people enjoy, that are well versed on health and wellness. It could also simply be referred to as the U.S. toxin diet. It begins with corn grown with oil-based fertilizer, and if you study corn, the root system of corn is really, really shallow. So it is well suited to the farming system that dominates our mass food supply today. Corn is also as close to being dead biologically as it could be, the way we raise it. Maybe 200 or 300 years ago, it had some biological attraction to it, but today there really is none. Corn is as close to being dead as any biology could be, in my opinion. Another popular crop is soybeans, which you may be familiar with, and you see them growing. You see soybeans being grown, but the crops are generally really sparse. I mean, not very many of them, because the beans are not as they don't have as high a return on investment, but the roots system of beans goes way down in the soil, and beans collect a lot of minerals, whereas corn doesn't. The corn root system is maybe 10 inches. It's not very deep. So it really works well with fertilizers, because and oil-based fertilizers, of course, are main. I mean, basically today that's all we have is oil-based fertilizer, and basically the soil's dead. It's been dead for years. We don't do crop rotation anymore to speak of. But occasionally somebody raises some beans on a field, or some kind of some other crop that they allow to die and go back into the soil. And what they're doing when they do that is all biology collects sunlight, and basically all food is sunlight. So when they raise another crop on there to allow it to go back into the soil, it lets sunlight go back into the soil. But still, if there wasn't, unless it's a really deep crop like soybeans, deep rooted crop I should say, it can't really get minerals out of the soil. So the whole idea here is that when they raise some other crop on there and they let it go back into the soil, generally it's some kind of a grass or similar biology, and the root system is not deep, so that they don't do anything but add sunlight to the soil, which is not a bad thing. But sunlight itself is not such a easy thing to make to keep your body alive, even though there are people in the world today that actually live only on sunlight. It's a possibility. It can be done, especially done in India. The religions of India encourage it, but it's not. It's just not done that much. It's not easy to do. But the few people that do it have been tested in our hospitals in the United States and shown that it really can happen, even though most doctors don't like to hear it. And certainly food companies don't want to hear it. All right, so let's go on here. Now, so this COB diet is really only about 100 years old. It started with the advent of importing lots of oil into our country. So it started basically about the same time that cars were first implemented in the United States and across the world. So people got the oil, cars got the oil, and there we go. And about this time also came the drugs. And the drugs had to happen because people started dying at 50, like my grandfather, and my father died at 67 or something like that. He wasn't very old, and they died of heart disease. But that's not the only thing that happens. Now we've got type 2 diabetes, which is it's a really bad disease. If you have it, because you can lose toes and feet. I've had a good friend, Jim Taves, died a few years ago that had type 2. He lost his foot, and eventually they had to cut his foot off. I mean, he just couldn't handle it. So eventually he died of a heart attack. But I mean, this is a disastrous disease, along with cancer, which is really cancer is caused by mostly toxins. So the crops that we raise today are mostly toxins, but are not mostly toxins, but there are a lot of toxins in them. And the reason is that in order to keep them alive, since they're monocrops, all right, they're not. I mean, there's no variety to them, so pests get into them real easily. And once they do, they're destructive as hell for a crop. So they have to, in order to kill a pest, they have to kill. They have to spray really harmful chemicals on them to get rid of the pests. And when they do that, these things can be so serious that I had a friend that died another friend that died a few years ago, and he was a farmer, and he told me about some of the stuff he was spraying on his crops. He raised mostly soybeans. No, not soybeans. He raised mostly what was it? Lima beans. That's it. Lima beans. All right. And around here, lima beans are a pretty successful crop. Not very often in the country. I mean, but the farmers around here do pretty well with lima beans, and he raised them for a number of years. He called them limers, and he would tell me about how he would go out and spray the limers and come back, and his head was all messed up, and he had to eventually I think he died about age 70, something like that. He lived pretty long, considering the fact that he was poisoning himself with lima bean, the toxins they use on lima beans, which are pretty high. I mean, it's a monocrop too, but lima beans are a whole lot better for you, I mean, than corn. I mean, we eat corn, but mostly our corn, all the corn you see raised is for cows, and mainly for cows, for meat. So meat, they grind it up, make feed out of it, put a few chemicals in there to help it out, and they got feed, and they feed it to the meat cattle, and people eat it, not knowing that they're getting all of this garbage in it with it. Nobody's going to tell them. There's a lot of money made in this, and basically our whole country is on a meat diet. There are a few vegetarians, and let's face it, vegetarians eat corn. They eat the same thing that everybody else does, and that's fertilizer-based food. And fertilizer, of course, comes from oil. So they're not getting anything. They're just getting it slower. That's basically what you're saying. If you look at it, the way it works is that beef cattle are eating corn, and corn is a sun-based fuel. And I mean, if they didn't eat some grass too, they'd probably all die. But they eat a lot of corn. And they put them in finishing bins. I don't know if you know about this, but they stick these cattle, these beef cattle, in finishing bins, and they feed them until they basically can hardly move, and then they slaughter them. So that's called finished meat, and that meat is really high in fat. And the fat, of course, is where they concentrate the chemicals. So when you eat, and that's called marbling of beef. And marbled beef is the number one beef when you go out to eat. All right. So, or in the grocery store, in high-end grocery stores, marbled beef is the thing everybody wants. So. Basically, you're getting a concentration of toxins in the fat, and you're just dying sooner. That's all. Let's see what else did I want to talk about? Termination. Okay, so we get arthritis. Let me talk a little bit about arthritis, because arthritis is an interesting disease. It's only one disease, even though, well, there's two types of arthritis, but it's really only one disease, and it's really caused by a lack of sulfur, organic sulfur, in your diet. And when they went to farming in 100 years ago, the sulfur was depleted almost immediately in the soil. And soil normally has some sulfur in it, and if it's not been used commercially for growing corn, so it doesn't take very long for it to eat up the sulfur. So the sulfur's gone, and that means that your diet consists of zero organic sulfur. So what's the first thing we get when we grow up now? For the most part, it's arthritis. So we get arthritis. I got my first arthritis. I think, I guess I've basically had arthritis all my life. But it didn't really come on big time until I got into my 30s anyway. And at that point, it got so bad that I could not drive a car. It was in my upper leg. at the joint on my right side, and I think some of that was inherited, but obviously it was all caused. The basic, what you inherit is the propensity toward arthritis, not the arthritis itself. The arthritis comes from a lack of organic sulfur. So anyway, I had this terrible disease at age, I guess I was 29, something like that. I couldn't drive a car. It was so bad that I couldn't push down on the throttle. And what I found out was that if I took aspirin, it would go away. And so that was my only way to fix it for a number, 20 years. So at age 56, the year I found out about MSM and with it DMSO, which are both organic forms of sulfur, and I started taking. I went online. This is all in my books. I went online and I found a farmer in Kentucky who raised horses. And if you know people that raise horses, they're pretty dear. They cost a lot of money, and that's all his family did was supply MSM by the buckets full to people that raised horses. But his family took MSM on a daily basis, and he told me, this was in dial-up. This is in dial-up times. He told me that nobody in his family had arthritis. I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. So I said, okay, what can I do about it? He says, look, I'll send you a bucket of it. He had a website. Like I said, it was in dial-up times. He had a pretty nice website. And he had 32 people in his family, and none of them had arthritis. So he said, I'll send you a bucket of it. He said, I got a rail car full of it out here. He says, all you got to do is just pay the postage. So he sent me a bucket, and that was the beginning of the end for arthritis for me. Age 56, I can remember. It wasn't 2 months later that my arthritis in my hip was gone, and I also had at the same time really bad knees, and I had seen a local sports doctor here, and he told me that I was going to have knee replacement surgery, which didn't ever happen because I saw it on TV. It was how they operate on. Back in those days, they used to cut your knee below and above the joint and stick a steel knee joint in there. That was a pretty bad operation. It was basically carpentry, and I mean, it worked. I still know people today that have that. I think they're still alive, but it didn't last very long before doctors realized that there were, I should say surgeons realized that there were better ways to do it. So they ended up only replacing parts of the joint instead of the whole joint, and so you get stainless steel parts. Obviously, when you get a stainless steel part in your joint, it never ever is organic, and it can in your joint. If it changes at all, it's going to fail. But anyway, it works pretty good, and I've got friends that play tennis with me that have 2 artificial knee joints, and they do pretty well. But my joints are on both knees are excellent now. I don't have any problems with that. More things happen after that as a result of the MSM that I didn't expect, that I've learned about, and I write about in my books. The first book I wrote was called "It's the Liver Stupid." That's available on Amazon.com or Amazon Books, and under my name, James Robert Clark. And if you want to buy a copy of it, you can get it for about $12. And it's really a book on nutrition in general. I say supplements, but The supplements that I'm interested in are not really supplements in that they come with pills. One of the problems with taking any pills is that your body has trouble absorbing the pill on the way down, which is what it normally does when you eat food, and so you don't get the full benefit. So I always suggest that you take your food in organic food, but in as a whole food. And some of the things that I take and I write about in my books are of course I take the organic MSM, but I also take, and MSM is, by the way, from trees, and trees and in general are a good place to get your food because farmers don't have to use fertilizer, organic, especially oil-based fertilizer, to raise trees. So some of the things I take are cacao, which is what they make chocolate from. Now, a lot of people think chocolate's a great idea. It's not, because it's almost, I mean, if you ever ate chocolate without the sugar in it, it would be, you'd be spitting it back out probably. But cacao is really good to eat. It's unrefined chocolate, and it's a powder, and I take a good amount of it every day. And cacao is mainly magnesium. Magnesium is one of the finest anti-heart disease supplements you can get, and about half of the cacao powder itself is magnesium. The rest of it, it's okay, but it's kind of negligible. Some of the other things in there are moringa. Moringa is a tree that grows wild in India, and it's now raised in Western Africa quite a bit. Ghana is one of the big places it's raised. So it's a good place. And Ghana, by the way, is a tropical country. It has it has very excellent soil for the most part, full of minerals, but not particularly a growing soil. But moringa grows just fine in Ghana, and so does cacao. So those are two of the crops that grow there, and you'll find it when you go to buy it. You'll find it from often it'll come from Ghana. So what are some of the other things I take from there? Anything that comes from the ocean, small kelp, Irish sea moss is one of the things I'm particularly fond of, because Irish sea moss has almost all the minerals that you can get, and in organic form. It's really it's not really a moss as I understand it, but I've never seen it. And mine comes from the Maine coast. Maine coast of the United States. So they just gather it all and sell it, dry it and sell it. Let's see. Let's go back and talk about drugs again. Drugs are mainly, I mean, everybody's aware of them because we have to have them here in order to overcome our deficiencies, and most people couldn't survive without them. But what they do is they rob Peter to pay Paul. So they take the what's healthy in your body, and they rob a part of it to fix the part that they're intending to fix. Now, if you listen to a drug advertisement on TV, they're always really honest about that. They have to be. So they tell you that if you have a cough or whatever you got, and you take this drug, you're prone to this. And what you've done is you take their drug and you steal the effective part of it that somewhat heals. Never do they completely heal anything, but I mean, basically, once you get on the drug, you're on the drug until you die. But they steal the factors in your food for that particular drug. So, say magnesium. All right. So magnesium is necessary to heal your joints, or if you have migraines, which I suffered from until I got on MSM. But magnesium deficiency causes migraines. I can't say it causes them, but they happen together. Being as you got a low amount of magnesium in your diet, and I started getting that particular problem as soon as I got to be came into manhood at age 15, something like that. I started getting terrible migraines, and of course blindness. It's called a classic migraine. Blindness would come with it. Not blindness like you normally get. It'd be like looking into the sun for 5 minutes and looking away. That's the kind of blindness you have. It's not black, but the pain is excruciating, and it basically knock you out for 2 days. One day you got it, next day you can recover, but you feel terrible. So that's the magnesium problem. There are lots of. In my book, It's the Liver Stupid, is full of information about various minerals and supplements that you can take. Now, let's go back to sunlight again. Sunlight, again, like I told you, you can live on sunlight. So, I mean, the sun is a huge thing compared to the Earth. I mean, Earth is just a little spot, and the sun dominates everything around here. And without the sun, we wouldn't, of course, be alive. But you could live on sunlight. That's a key element right there. And even if you don't try to live on sunlight, which most of us don't, as a matter of fact, today our government allows these skin applications that basically stop you from getting sunlight. So silly stuff, really silly stuff. But the whole idea there is skin cancer is going to kill you, so they scare everybody, and most everybody wears a hat when they go play tennis, and everybody puts on sunblocks, and they do all kinds of things to stop it, so they don't get any sunlight. But even with that, 2/3 of the food that you consume is sunlight. So only 1/3 of what you eat is sunlight. And we got all these people with these diets, these diet programs that they sell, and they're out to help people lose weight. So if only 1/3 of what you eat is food, how much do you think these programs do for you? Especially if you stay on sugar and you stay on corn, and you stay on potatoes and starches, the chances of you ever changing your weight are almost zero. I mean, you might change it for a short time if you don't eat anything, or if you cut way back. But most people eat garbage, and mostly sugar, in something that they eat. Everything. In other words, the food in the store, grocery store, shouldn't be called food. It should be called sugar-based ingestive products. I think would be a good one. But anyway, you're not going to get a good diet from anything that you buy in the store for the most part, because even though it may have been raised in the sun, it might be green, it might be some color, which colors are what we're looking for. It might be orange, carrots, and it might be some kind of fruit. But all of that stuff is raised with fertilizer in crops in California by commercial crop growers, and it's therefore full of poison. So you eat a whole lot of it, and you get a whole lot of poison. But if you eat a lot of meat, you get a lot of poison quicker. That's all. And I'm not here to convince anybody to become a vegetarian or a fruitarian or anything like that. But obviously, if you can't get good meat, clean meat, in other words, if you went out and shot a duck, that would be probably clean, but you don't know what those ducks have been eating. They might have been landing in some farmer's cornfield and eating their corn. And you know, if they did that very often, they would be just like what you buy in the store. Same way with deer. People go out hunting deer and they think they get this really clean meat, but it's not. It's the same thing. The deer are not stupid. They go out and they eat corn from the cornfield. Farmers hate it, but they do, and they survive based on corn. If you could get a truly wild deer, that would be an excellent food, and it would be a dense source of food because they consume sunlight, but not so much, and they eat lots of vegetables that are raised in sunlight. So they would be a good source of food if you could find them. Not so easy. Now, so let's cancer. Cancer is one of my favorite subjects because everybody in my family has died from it at some point. Everybody, just about everybody, and you know, I always try to help them, but I haven't been able to so far. And the reason that you get cancer is because of these what they're putting in the food that you eat to keep it alive. So these are toxins, and you're eating toxins, and the density is pretty high for all commercial foods. So, and of course we do have toxins in our environment too, and so the whole thing together makes cancer a pretty devastating disease. We call it a disease. I'm not sure cancer really is a disease. I think it's a transformation. We know that our cells actually change when they diagnose cancer. The whole tumor cancer I'm talking about. The whole tumor is no longer living on oxygen. And basically, I think my interpretation is that cancer is a disease that your body changing the way it survives, and because there is not enough oxygen compared to the toxin levels to live. So it's pretty. I mean, that's just one. Maybe it happens in several different ways. I'm not sure. How would I know? I don't think anybody does. And then the last thing we have is vascular disease. And vascular disease is number one killer in the United States. No question about it. When you include heart disease and stroke together, right? Because heart disease is usually put out. It's usually considered a single disease, even though stroke and heart disease are both vascular diseases that occur as a result of a low organic sulfur. One of the things that happens, I've noticed from my friends that get arthritis, is that the next thing they're going to get is heart disease. It's both caused by the same problem. So they have knee problems when they're 35. They have, as I had hip problems when I was 30. And the next thing they get is back problems, and they're in pain. And none of this helps you. None of this helps you want to survive. And the next thing they get when they turn 60 or so is some kind of a heart disease, high blood pressure, and then a stroke or a heart attack. And if you go look back and look at the statistics today, men only live to be 80, women live to be 85, and that's been pretty much the case since the 1900s, that women outlived men 5 years. Started out something like 60 and 65, and now it's 80 and 85. Managed to keep our bodies alive another 20 years. Okay.